the alien princess thought her human husband was Benign, until his FurySci-Fi. Princess Salith of the Silver Crest moved gracefully through the grand hall of the Velithari Palace, her silver hair catching the light of the tall, crystalline windows. She was the pride of the Velithari Star Empire, a civilization older than most galaxies. Every noble in the room watched her as she walked, silent respect and awe filling the chamber. But she barely noticed them. Her thoughts were elsewhere on her human husband, Elias Ward, who waited quietly at the edge of the room. Elias was unlike any Velithari she had known. Where the court moved with a mixture of arrogance and ceremony, Elias moved gently, almost shyly. His human skin was soft, his posture relaxed, and he smiled at the smallest courtesies. To the Velithari nobles he seemed harmless. They called him the soft mammal behind his back. Salith herself had once believed it. When they married, she had been curious about humanity. She had heard stories of their bravery, their cleverness, but she had also been warned about their fragility. In the first months of their marriage, she believed the warnings were true. Elias avoided conflict, apologized for mistakes he had not made, and never raised his voice, even when insulted by Velithari ambassadors. Yet even in his quietness, he fascinated her. He observed things others ignored. He noticed subtle changes in the light of the palace halls, the soft hum of machinery behind walls, and the precise timing of the ceremonial events. When Salith talked about politics, he asked questions that seemed simple, but they were carefully chosen. He did not speak much of strategy or war, but when he did, his words carried a clarity that made her pause. The palace itself was a monument to Velithari pride. Towers of shining metal stretched into the sky, and the throne room alone could hold thousands. Every wall was covered with symbols of past victories, and holographic banners displayed the names of famous Velithari leaders. Humans rarely visited the palace, and most thought Elias out of place. Yet Salith loved him. He had a warmth that no Velithari had ever shown her, a calm certainty that made her trust him without question. Their mornings were quiet. While Salith met with ministers, Elias wandered the gardens, tending to small human plants he had grown from seeds brought from Earth. The plants were fragile, but Elias nurtured them with patience. He often spoke to them softly, as if they could understand. Some Velithari observers had laughed at the sight, but Salith only smiled. He seemed to bring life wherever he went. Despite his gentle appearance, there were moments that hinted at something more. Once, while walking through a palace corridor, a small group of Velithari soldiers had joked cruelly at his expense. Elias had simply nodded, keeping his calm smile, but Salith noticed the way his eyes lingered on each soldier, reading their movements, memorizing their gestures. Another time, when she casually mentioned an old security flaw in a palace entrance, he asked questions that went beyond curiosity. His questions were precise, deliberate, and made her feel that he understood far more than he let on. Life in the Velithari court was changing. Across the galaxy, tensions were rising. The Krax Dominion, a species known for brutal military campaigns, had begun expanding into nearby star systems. Their ships were fast and deadly, and their leaders had little respect for diplomacy. The Velithari Empire, proud of its tradition and power, prepared cautiously. The council debated for hours, speaking in lofty language about honor, strategy, and etiquette. Elias listened quietly, saying almost nothing. The nobles had dismissed him entirely. "Humans are weak," one whispered. "They cannot survive in the empire, let alone help rule it." Salith had overheard the comment and felt a small sting of embarrassment. Even she had occasionally questioned whether her choice in marrying a human had been wise. Yet something in Elias told her she had underestimated him. One evening, Salith found him in the palace observatory, gazing at the stars. His human eyes reflected distant lights, and he spoke softly, almost to himself. "The Krax fleets will strike soon. Their strategy is predictable. They underestimate our adaptability." Even the Velithari fleet. There was a sharpness in his tone, a quiet confidence that made her heart beat faster. "You make it sound so simple," she said. He smiled, still calm. "Simple is different from easy, and easy is never enough in this galaxy." He asked about energy shields, logistics of starship fleets, and the weaknesses in communication arrays. To the Velithari, his questions were academic curiosity, but Salith noticed that he was memorizing every detail, creating mental maps of the palace, the fleet deployments, and the neighboring systems. Despite the rising tension with the cracks, Elias maintained his calm demeanor. He never raised his voice, never lost his composure, and always appeared gentle. Yet Salith began to sense a quiet intensity behind his eyes, a controlled fire that no one had ever seen. She wondered how a human could hide so much strength beneath such a mild exterior. One morning, as they walked together in the palace gardens, Salith asked him, "Elias, do you ever feel afraid?" "Humanity has learned to live with fear and still act. That is our strength." The Velithari fleet moved cautiously through border systems, conducting patrols and reinforcing defenses. The Crack's dominion made no moves yet, but their reputation for sudden strikes made the palace nervous. Throughout it all, Elias remained beside Salith, calm, observing, and ready. No one in the court realized how important he would become. They continued to mock him, to underestimate him, to assume that his gentleness was weakness. Even Salith sometimes struggled to believe in the full extent of his abilities. But beneath his calm exterior, Elias was already preparing. He studied every possibility, every contingency. He mapped potential battlefields in his mind. He considered the human strategies of deception, endurance, and psychological advantage that had allowed their species to survive against far stronger foes in their own galaxy. The subtle hints of his true capabilities began to show in small ways. A ship that seemed broken during a simulation was repaired before anyone else noticed. A security flaw that had been ignored for decades was quietly fixed. When a Velithari guard accidentally revealed a potential breach in the palace defenses, Elias calmly noted the problem, traced it in his mind, and suggested a solution that no Velithari officer had considered. Salith watched him closely, feeling a mixture of admiration and unease. She had married a man she thought she understood. Yet every day she discovered that he was far more than the gentle, harmless human she had first believed. He was patient, clever, and unassuming, and there was a quiet strength in him that promised he could do things no Velithari could imagine. As the first warning signals from the Crack's dominion began to appear near Velithari space, Salith stood at the balcony of the palace, looking out at the stars. Elias joined her, silent, and placed a hand lightly on hers. "We must trust each other," he said softly. "Soon, patience will not be enough, but when the time comes, we will act." She had married a human, expecting gentleness. Instead, she had discovered something far more dangerous and far more remarkable. The stars beyond the palace seemed to hum with tension, as though the galaxy itself sensed the coming storm. And somewhere, deep in the calm eyes of Elias Ward, there was a fire that no one had yet dared to imagine. The Empire was about to face a test unlike any it had known, and the gentle human by Salith's side would soon reveal that even the softest hand could wield unimaginable power when necessary. The Velithari Empire had grown complacent. Their fleets were strong, their weapons advanced, and their centuries of tradition gave them a sense of invincibility. Yet in the shadows of their borders, the Crack's dominion moved silently, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Salith felt it in her bones. Something was coming. Elias Ward stood quietly in the council chamber, listening as Velithari admirals debated the next steps. The humans' diplomatic approach had seemed harmless at first, but now he realized the stakes had shifted. The Cracks were not here for negotiation. They were here to intimidate, to conquer, and perhaps even to humiliate the Velithari. The council argued over fleets, patrol routes, and political threats. Their language was lofty, their logic elegant, but Elias saw gaps that no Velithari officer noticed. Communications were too centralized. Defensive measures relied heavily on tradition rather than adaptability. And most importantly, the Council underestimated the unpredictability of an enemy willing to strike without warning. "Perhaps we should consider preemptive maneuvers," Elias said quietly. His voice carried calm authority, but the Council barely heard him. "Humans do not understand our honor codes," one admiral said dismissively. "We cannot act without proper ceremony." They believed that his human nature made him timid, incapable of true action in the face of danger. But the Cracks had no patience for hesitation. Weeks later, reports arrived of sudden attacks on border colonies. Small Cracks fleets appeared, striking supply stations and diplomatic outposts. Their goal was clear: to create fear and confusion. The Velithari fleet scrambled in response, but their movements were slow, formal, and predictable. During a tense summit, Cracks envoys arrived in the capital system, their ships casting shadows over the palace orbit. The Velithari Council met them in the ceremonial hall, hoping to display strength. Salith watched tense as the Cracks representative sneered at the human diplomat standing beside her. "Is this your protector?" one Cracks officer hissed, gesturing at Elias. "A soft mammal, the stories are true. The Velithari laugh at weakness." His expression was calm, almost serene. He bowed his head slightly and spoke, his voice soft but deliberate. "I apologize if humanity offends your sensibilities. We mean no harm, but we also expect respect. No spine, no courage." Later that night, Salith found him alone in the palace archives, surrounded by maps of the Empire and Cracks fleet positions. The human diplomat she had once thought fragile was studying every possible threat, every potential response. "They think I am weak," he said softly, almost to himself. "Let them. Underestimating us is their first mistake. And when the moment comes, clarity becomes power." Each time the Velithari fleet responded, but always after hesitation, after ceremonial calculation, and often after losing resources that could have been saved. Elias, however, quietly implemented human strategies behind the scenes. He rerouted communications, set up hidden patrol routes, and suggested deceptive fleet formations. His tactics were subtle, almost invisible, but incredibly effective. Cracks attacks that should have succeeded failed unexpectedly. Supplies reached besieged colonies just in time. Retreating enemy squads were ambushed by countermeasures no Velithari had planned. Salith began to see the truth of his words. Humanity's strength was not in brute force but in intelligence, patience, and adaptability. He did not fight for glory. He fought for survival, using every resource and every opportunity. One morning, the Cracks launched a particularly bold strike, aiming directly at a border colony known for its shipyards. Velithari commanders hesitated, debating the ceremonial response while the colony came under heavy fire. Salith felt panic rising in her chest, but Elias remained calm. He accessed the Empire's emergency networks, routing fleets in secret and activating human-designed defense systems. When the Cracks ships arrived, they found themselves surrounded by what seemed like small, isolated squadrons. But each squadron was strategically placed, exploiting weaknesses in Cracks' formations. Within hours, the strike was repelled. Cracks' ships retreated, their confidence shaken. Velithari admirals were stunned. How could such a small, seemingly unarmed human have orchestrated the defense so perfectly? Salith approached Elias in the aftermath, unable to contain her awe. I don't understand. How did you know?" "They underestimated me, and that cost them." "But you are different." The human she had married, whom she had thought delicate and harmless, was already shaping the course of an interstellar war with quiet precision. The realization was both frightening and exhilarating. In the days that followed, the Cracks' dominion grew more aggressive. They assumed that the Velithari Empire, guided by tradition and ceremonial caution, would eventually falter. They did not expect the human at Salith's side. Every move they made was anticipated, countered, or disrupted. The Empire began to whisper rumors of Elias Ward's ingenuity, though few understood the full extent of his strategy. Salith watched him closely, fascinated by his calm determination. He did not boast, he did not command loudly, and he did not seek recognition. Yet every action he took revealed a mind far sharper than anyone in the Velithari court had imagined. He was a master of patience, a student of strategy, and a force of nature hidden behind a gentle exterior. And Salith began to understand something important. The true danger of humans was not in what they showed, but in what they could unleash when necessary. As the Crack's fleets prepared for another strike, far larger and more coordinated than the last, the Velithari Empire stood at a crossroads. Tradition demanded caution. Pride demanded honor. But Elias Ward, the seemingly benign human, had already begun to write the rules of survival anew. The part ended with the distant red glows of Crack's warships appearing on the sensors near the Imperial core. Salith turned to Elias, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and trust. "Are we ready?" she asked. He smiled faintly, calm as ever. "We have always been ready, they just do not know it yet." And in that silence, the galaxy waited for the next move, unaware that a quiet, gentle human was about to reveal the true power of humanity. The warning alarms echoed through the Velithari capital like a cry of fear. Red lights spread across the palace walls, and holographic displays flickered to life, showing one terrible truth. The Crack's dominion had arrived in force. Their warships filled the space around the Imperial core, dark and sharp like claws closing around prey. This was no border raid. This was a full invasion. Velithari admirals rushed into command chambers, shouting orders in strict ceremonial language. Fleets were summoned, shields raised, and ancient defense protocols activated. Everything happened according to tradition. Everything happened too slowly. Princess Salith stood at the main command platform, her heart pounding. She looked at the screens, at the enemy ships drawing closer, and felt fear for her people. Then she looked at Elias. He stood quietly beside her, his face calm, his posture steady, but something about him had changed. The gentle warmth she knew was still there, yet behind it was something sharp, focused, and unyielding. "This is the moment," Elias said softly. Salith swallowed. "What do we do?" But time was running out, and Salith made the choice. "Give him access," she commanded. The room fell silent. Elias moved with calm speed, his hands working across the control interface. He did not shout, he did not rush. His voice was steady as he issued orders that broke every Velithari tradition. "Split the fleets," he said. "Turn off ceremonial formations. Use irregular movement. Scatter energy signatures." Crack's targeting system struggled to lock on. The first Crack's attack came hard and fast. Energy blasts struck where the Velithari fleet had been moments earlier, missing entirely. In response, small groups of Velithari ships struck from different angles, hitting key systems and retreating before the Cracks could respond. Salith watched in disbelief. "This is human warfare," Elias said calmly. "We do not meet strength with strength, we meet it with thought." Human-designed algorithms redirected energy flows, strengthening shields in some areas while leaving others seemingly weak. The Cracks took the bait, focusing their attacks where they believed victory was close. Instead, their ships were pulled into carefully prepared traps. Communication interference cut them off from one another. Their formations broke. Panic spread through their ranks. Elias' calm never wavered. "Now," he said quietly, "we apply pressure." But the Cracks were not defeated yet. A massive Cracks flagship broke through the outer defenses and headed straight for the capital. Its weapons charged, powerful enough to breach the palace shields. Velithari officers froze. This ship was too strong, too fast. Elias' eyes hardened. "This one is mine," he said. He rerouted power from non-essential systems and activated a final contingency, one that no Velithari officer recognized. Human emergency doctrine. The palace shields shifted, not strengthening but bending. Energy was absorbed, redirected, and released in controlled bursts. When the Crack's flagship fired, the blast did not shatter the shields. Instead, it was reflected, scattering harmlessly into space. Before the enemy could react, coordinated strikes disabled the flagship's engines. It drifted, powerless, surrounded by Velithari ships. Silence filled the command chamber. The Cracks had never seen anything like this. Their remaining fleets hesitated. Their confidence, once absolute, began to crack. They had expected fear, tradition, and predictable resistance. Instead, they faced something far worse, a calm enemy who understood them completely. "This is not fury," Elias said, as if reading Salith's thoughts. "This is restraint. Fury comes next if needed." He ordered controlled pursuit, forcing them to abandon occupied systems and leave behind damaged ships and supplies. He did not destroy them fully. He wanted them to remember. Across the galaxy, emergency transmissions spread. Other civilizations watched the battle in disbelief. The Velithari Empire, once thought rigid and slow, had shattered a Crack's invasion in hours. And at the center of it all was a human. Salith finally understood. Elia's gentleness had never been weakness. It had been discipline. When the last Crack's ship fled beyond sensor range, the alarms fell silent. The capital was safe. The command chamber remained quiet as officers slowly turned toward Elias. No one mocked him now. No one dismissed him. He stepped back, returning control to the Velithari admirals. His hands relaxed, his shoulders eased, the fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced once more by the calm man Salith knew. "Is it over?" she asked. "For now," he replied. "They will not return soon." Control is harder. Humanity learned long ago that survival depends on knowing when to stop. Most are. And the Cracks finally understood the truth they had ignored for too long. Never mistake patience for weakness. The storm had passed, but its echo would reshape the galaxy forever. The war ended quietly. There were no victory parades in the Velithari capital, no loud celebrations or songs of conquest. Instead, there was silence, deep, thoughtful silence. The kind that followed a moment when history had changed and everyone knew it. The Crack's dominion retreated far beyond Velithari space. Their fleets were damaged, their pride wounded, and their confidence shattered. For the first time in generations, they had met an enemy they could not intimidate. Princess Salith stood in the Grand Council Hall as representatives from across the Empire gathered. The walls still showed faint scorch marks from the battle, reminders of how close destruction had come. Yet the capital still stood. The Empire still lived, and everyone knew why. Elia's ward stood near the edge of the chamber, calm and quiet, exactly as he always had been. He wore no symbols of rank, no medals, no signs of command. If someone did not know better, they would think he was only a human observer. But now, every eye followed him. Velithari nobles who once mocked him now lowered their heads in respect. Admirals who once ignored his words now studied his every movement. The title, Soft Mammal, was never spoken again. The council began with long speeches about survival, honor, and unity. Then Salith rose to speak. "The Velithari Empire stands today because we adapted," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We survived because we listened when tradition was no longer enough." Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, others nodded slowly. An elder counselor finally spoke. "Human Elia's ward," he said, choosing his words carefully. "You acted beyond your role. You commanded fleets, altered defenses, and shaped this war. Why? And because survival matters more than pride. We learned patience instead." Humanity was declared a strategic equal of the Velithari Empire. Across known space, the announcement spread. Other species reacted with shock, some with fear, some with sudden respect. Diplomatic messages flooded toward Earth and Velithari space. Civilizations that once ignored humanity now wanted alliances, treaties, and protection. The galaxy had learned a lesson. Salith felt the change most deeply in private moments. When the council meetings ended, when the palace halls grew quiet, Elias returned to his simple routines. He walked the gardens. He cared for his plants. He spoke kindly to servants and guards. The fury he had shown in battle was gone. One evening, Salith joined him among the green leaves and soft lights of the garden. She watched him gently adjust a plant's position so it could catch more light. "You saved an empire," she said softly, "and yet you act as if nothing changed. You chose peace." Every conclusion led to the same truth. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not seek domination. They did not rely on overwhelming force. They studied. They adapted. They waited. And when pushed too far, they struck with terrifying precision. The cracks signed a ceasefire soon after. It was not announced with pride. It was announced with caution. Back on the Velithari capital, life slowly returned to normal, but it was a different normal. Defensive doctrines were rewritten. Military training changed. Human advisors were invited into planning rooms that had once been closed to outsiders. Elias refused titles. He refused statues. He refused to sit on the throne. "I am not a ruler," he said. "I am a reminder. Ruling is easy. Protecting what matters is harder." Stories of fury that came only when all other paths failed. The Velithari Empire endured. Humanity rose, not through conquest but through understanding. And the galaxy learned a final truth.